Welcome to the June 15 OpenJ9 community call. As always, when you join, please add your name and affiliation to the agenda just so that we know who's been joining the meetings. And I'll pause here for a second for people to add anything they'd like to add to the agenda. So if there's a topic that's not on here already that you'd like to see us cover today, you can either chime in now or we can tackle it when we get to the any other business section at the end of the agenda.
Hi, Dan. I actually should have added lightning talk as well. I don't know if you have time in the agenda today. If not, I can do it next week, but we have more in our series if you want some.
Yeah, if you have one ready to go, then let's certainly jump into that.
For sure. And for people's awareness, there's also a wiki page now that's shared in the OpenJ9 Slack channel around how you find the talks and know what's coming up. I'll add that also to the... Did you want me to go now?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay.
Take over the screen sharing. And
cool. Okay, I'm just going to say a few words about the tests. I'm going to try to keep this to 5 minutes, but it's probably more likely 7 minutes. As all of you know, you've been seeing lots of lightning talks about running tests in grinders. I wanted to talk briefly about running tests locally on the command line. But before I do that, I'd like to revisit what these Aqua tests are and how they're divided, so that you understand some of the goals we were trying to achieve. So we have the notion of slicing and dicing tests into groups, being functional group, OpenJDK group, system group, external group, and perf group. And those are the Aquavit tests. And there's also a JCK group that is the TCK Tamarind compliance test, or something outside of Aquavit. We can break those up into levels, and we can run different impls, including OpenJ9, which we like to do. Different versions are supported. You can tag tests as being regular or native, and if they're native, that means we expect to find some native libraries as well. The definitions are kept in the Adoptium Aquatest repo, and you can see that the repo is organized by the same group names. There's external, functional, JCK, OpenJDK, perf, and system. And so that's where you'll find playlists. You'll also find playlists within the Eclipse OpenJ9 repo. A lot of functional tests live in OpenJ9. And in fact, there's over 20,000 test cases within this repository. So a lot of good, rich testing that lives here. You'll also see on this slide that if we were to have you learn each of the underlying test repository or test frameworks, you'd have to learn a new type of command line for each one. There's testng, JUnit, JTReg, STF, and Maven-based stuff, all kinds of SBT stuff. So we didn't want you to have to learn all those different command lines. So we decided to put a layer called testgitgen in the way, which helps us simplify the commands you'd need to know to how to run stuff locally. It also helps us automate things better. So that's our slice and dice slide. Oops. Let me just go back. The overview of what I'm going to show you. There's a documentation that's very helpful in OpenJ9 called Reproducing Failures Locally. You have to install test prereqs one time, once only on your machine, and if you hit problems, there are some detailed installation instructions at that link. Then you have to have either you download a JDK to test or you build it locally to test, but something that you're going to test. And that's related then to the two required environment variables for running tests locally. You need to tell us what you want to test, and you tell us that through the test JDK home environment variable. And then you need to tell us what you want to compile and what tests you might want to execute. And you do that by the build list environment variable. There's lots of other environment variables, but I'm not going to cover them today. So I'm going to go through the compile and the execute, and then showing where to find test output locally. So the demo is going to be, I'm going to compile a few things, I'm going to run some targets, and we can talk a bit about some of the common issues that people hit. So before I continue, let me do my quick little demo. And actually the demo being, really, I'm just going to export. I've already done this in my local, but if I want to make sure, I export my test JDK home. I export my build list. And in this case, I notice that it's a comma separated list of some top level folder. I want to build all of the system test material, and I want to build some of the perf material. So I'm going to do that as well. And then I could just say make compile, which I've already done, and I guess I can do again and just kill it. And that's going to compile everything within this system test repo down here. And how does it know what it's going to compile? It's going to look at these Ant scripts. And if I only wanted to compile things within this math load test, I could have said system/math load test, and it would only compile test material relating to this folder, just as I did for this perf decapo piece. I didn't want to compile the Renaissance stuff or the Liberty stuff or Bumblebench or Idle Micro. I just wanted to compile those pieces. All right, so that'll probably take, oh, very good, it's done. Those things compiled. Let's go back. Now I want to run a system test target. And the system test target I want to run is actually in this playlist. All the test targets are defined within the playlists. So you can see test case name, and that's an actual target. I could say I want to run that by going make underscore and then that. Oops. Hopefully that's what I did. No, I probably hit something. Make, that wouldn't work. So this is a good one to show that, hey, nothing got run. And when that happens in a grinder, that's going to mark as failed because we consider it an actual error if you don't define something that works. So that's running a target that doesn't exist. I just demoed. It's a underscore make doesn't exist as a target. So let's go back and correct that and just do what I had intended to do. So that's going to run that JLM target. If I'd only wanted to run this first variation, I could have gone underscore test JLM local underscore 0, and it would take the first instance, the first variation, and only run that. But you'll see, because I didn't put an underscore and a suffix there, it's going to take the two modes that are applicable to this platform and this version that I'm running. So it'll actually run this test twice with different command line options. So while that goes ahead, I'm going to pop back over just to talk about these the test granularity, the notion that we have a group. So an example would be system, like we're running now, or OpenJDK. We have top level test targets, so we can slice and dice group into 3 levels: sanity, extended, and special. So an example of level.group, I could run sanity.system, and it would run everything in the playlist that was tagged as sanity. So it would go through and find all of the system tests that I had compiled and run them as sanity. So that completed and passed. 2 targets were run because 2 were applicable. Now I want to run the Decapo Avrova, I won't try to pronounce it, but I will try to run it. A single target out of that perf folder that I compiled, and that is this target, and it's going to run a perf test for me locally. And there we have it. Now what? What about this? Can I actually go see test results? What happens when I look? Well, you can see that I've been actually running a lot of tests locally, and each time I run a test, an output folder is created with a timestamp. So I can clear that out, run something, and then go find my test results. And in those, depending on what the underlying test framework is, it could be HTML files or JTR files, depending on what is this underlying framework that you're running. Okay, the only other piece I wanted to say about this, and I think I've made my lightning talk, is that remembering how the granularity works and what groups and levels mean, and knowing that we use the same mechanism across all types. Remember, the goal for us was to try to make these very different test frameworks look and feel the same to developers and to automation. Means that a group, which is represented by the columns here, can be divided up into levels represented by the rows. If I wanted to run one of the test targets within it, I could go into a playlist and find a test case name and run stuff from there. And for some of these, there's a notion of a custom target. So, for example, OpenJDK can be broken down. So there's a JDK_custom target that is defined. There's a system_custom target. There will soon be a external_custom target where we can then define that a class or a directory could be run instead of the entire set that's tagged in the playlist. So this gives you the ability to pinpoint on certain test classes to be able to run those on their own. So that's probably what I'm going to cover for today's stuff. I want to invite people to go and take a look at some of the documentation. I have tried to update it. So I've referenced this running locally. I've referenced detailed instructions on how to install that one-time install that you'll need to be able to do. And also the wiki, which is these lightning talks and where to find the recording links. And we have about 5 more in the queue for sure. And thanks. Any questions that people have or want to ask? And I'll stop sharing.
Thanks, Shelley. There was one question from Jason. Jason,
Okay.
do you want to?
Yeah, sure. Thanks, Sherry, for the presentation. Just, every test target is followed by the number sign 0, 1, 2, 3. And I know it's mapping to the test mode, but I just wondering how they got mapped. Just follow the sequence or?
Always following the sequence. So the first variation is always named _0. And then if you're going, well, how do I know what _0 is? Because you didn't name the thing by the mode name. Well, the reason we didn't name it by mode name is that variation doesn't have to be a mode. It could just be the command line options directly in that tag. So we couldn't use that as a name, but it is always sequenced by the first variation listed as _0. And when we run the test, at the very top of the run, it lists what the command line options are that we use in the test. It prints it out when you're running locally or in the console of a test job.
All right, cool. Thanks.
Yeah, cool.
Yeah, just to add that we try to keep the number to be the same. So if you exclude, let's say, variation 2, then when you exclude, after you exclude the test, the remaining test number will just say the 2 is excluded, and then we'll skip 2 and then running 3. So we try to keep the same. As for the variation, yes, you can use mode. You can use just explicitly writing out the JVM options, and you can use combined, so modes plus JVM options as well. So we kind of support a lot different choices in the variation itself. That's that's the reason that we don't use writing the modes there, because that's just making this way too long.
That's right. And there was no way I could cover that in my already longer than 5-minute lightning talk. We've got an exclusion lightning talk coming up, I think, though, to go into some details about how to exclude things by granularity too.
Thanks, Shelley.
Thank you.
So the next thing on our list is just to take a quick look at the recent end user issues and see if there's anything here that needs some attention that hasn't been getting it. I don't see anything here jumping out at me. Is there anything in this list that somebody else thinks needs some attention or discussion at this point? Jump back to our schedule. In the interest of time, I'm going to skip over the download trends unless there's some discussion that needs to happen there. Pete, one of the items we've been tracking here has been running the extended testing in the OpenJ9 farm. Have you had a chance to follow up on that?
Yeah, I did run it for some version of Java, and there were some failures, but they mostly look like machine issues. Some of them we've seen before, so there's an issue created, but I don't know that anybody's going to have time to look at it in the foreseeable future.
Okay. If you could link the issues here, that might just help us track that.
Yep.
Then if we take a look at the 0.27 release, we see that we have somebody else has updated this. Pete, is that you that's taken a look at this?
Yeah, I just gave a little summary of what's still in the milestone. So I believe the JIT's going to be taking a closer look at what's left in the milestone plan and moving some things out in the next week. I wasn't sure about the test issue, the AGCT test issue. Shelley, I think you're going to look at enabling a test.
I'm going to have to find the issue number again. Is this the one related to the, it was raised by Toby?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I looked at that. I thought that I found that the test material wasn't in the extensions repo, in which case, I'm remembering right, yeah. In which case, if you want access to that test material, we can do that by a grinder, or you can go and override the JDK repo. But you don't want to override the JDK repo for all the other tests. You want to pull that material from from the extensions repo. So the problem is this material doesn't live in the IBM extensions repo. So we'll have to get it from the public tip or some matching mirror repo, right, for JDK.
So it's in the actual OpenJDK repo, but not in the IBM runtimes copy?
Correct, yeah.
So well, maybe we could just fix how we mirror to include it.
Yeah. So maybe, do you want me to raise an issue in the extensions repo to look at updating?
Sure.
Because, yeah, okay. That's the holdout right now. I can run a grinder with it and override JDK repo for that target, but I can't easily do that just for a single target and use a different repo for the other stuff in a regular test run. Okay, I'll take an action there.
Thanks, Shelley. So with those 35 items and our milestone build coming up on June 27th, we're looking 2 weeks-ish to get that done. So if you do own one of those items, please do take a look at them and see if it's possible to get that closed out sort of as soon as possible.
Yeah, there might be a couple more things that will get resolved, but I expect most of these things are just going to move out.
That's kind of my expectation as well. I know last time we talked, there was internal builds that had been created for Milestone 1. Has approval to publish them come through?
Well, the short answer is no.
All right,
I think that's
so
the long answer. I think we're waiting for the awesome approvals and stuff. And I think Archana was off today, so I'm not sure what the status was.
okay. Be good to be able to get these out there just to get them in somebody's hands before we hit the GA date. Hopefully, have all the ducks in a row for when the GA goes out.
Yeah, we did do the builds, so we have them. We can publish them when we get the approval.
Sounds good. Again, in the interest of time, we'll skip over the 0.28 release. We can talk about that one as after we've gotten more of the
Well,
0.27.
just a quick note that there was a code split for JDK 17, and we haven't yet created the JDK 17 IBM runtimes repo, so we have no JDK 17 builds at the moment.
Do we have an ETA on when that repo can be created?
I think that's something we'll discuss tomorrow and get back next week with an ETA.
Yep. I do want to continue to track the OpenJDK method handles uptake work. Checking, is Jack on the call?
Yes, Dan. Can you guys hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so for the OpenJDK's method handle work, we're expanding the test triage beyond just sanity testing. I am currently looking at the extended functional, OpenJDK sanity, and extended system. We are seeing some test failures. Most of them are already documented and tracked. They're either pending a fix review, or some of them are test codes that we should be excluding as we are matching the RI's behavior. It's more of internal specific differences between OpenJ9 and OpenJDK that is causing the test failure. And I am working on getting those excluded by default. In terms of JIT performance, last week it updated that we're seeing up to, I think, 25x performance difference. The JIT team have been working on profiling, and one of the data they got was we're spending a tremendous amount of time inside interpreter, even though JIT have been working on compiling the code. Mostly is due to the INLs that for the invoke basic and the link to transition, which when JIT calls it, it forces a interpreted path instead of falling back to the compiled path if available. So JIT team have been working on a transformer to address the INL issue, and we're hoping to see it getting merged soon, and I'll update next week. I think that's it in terms of 292.
Jack, can the INL check if the target is compiled and do the transition there?
We're using J2I transition when interpreter needs to call back to JIT once the handling is done. J2I by default forces the method to be interpreted, which we can't change because other codes are relying on the same behavior. If we need to update it, if JIT are unable to work with the transformer, we can create new ways of returning the handle back to JIT in order to have the method run compiled.
Yeah, we had this problem with the original method handle implementation as well. And what we ended up doing there was we had the J to I transition, but then we would immediately transition back with an I to J. And so there should be existing code, possibly in the invoke handle or invoke handle generic bytecodes that knows how to deal with that, to be able to do that double transition, and the stack walkers should all be set up to be able to handle that as well. So it might be worth, that might be a shorter path forward.
I will definitely work with JIT team to look at those. I guess one of the problems about that is because the invoke basic and link to code are using on-stack transition. So the argument might be swapped a bit, and I'm not sure if we can continue to reuse our existing OpenJ9 code. But thanks, Dan. I will definitely talk with JIT team about using that approach as well.
Shelley, do you have an update in terms of adopt?
Just to say, we have our milestone 1 release that ran pipelines this morning for the 3 platforms for JDK 8. The TCK server is up, test jobs have been generated there, machines are being added and credentials added. So we'll start to do dry runs for the TCK against the milestone 1 release later this week, starting on XLinux, because that's what we have a machine configured up for. But we're hoping to get Windows and Mac machines added shortly. I think that's it. There's an Adoptium community call starting in 2 minutes that I'll drop to join and give the same update. That's probably it for now.
Thanks, Shelley. Adam, in terms of infrastructure, is there an update?
Not too much to report. The VPN move, we've added it to another worker, so Omar has moved its machine hopping to there, so we'll have to at some point coordinate and switch over all our machines to not hop anymore. Not a huge priority for that. There was an issue on the new Cent 6 compiles that happened in Docker containers, so we hit it last week. We thought it was resolved, and then we hit it again yesterday, and I think it's actually resolved this time. So hopefully that doesn't come up again.
Thanks, Adam. Devin, is there an update on the CMake migration?
Yeah, as part of my kind of back and forth with Chronosan, I identified some things where we could be doing some better auto detection of some of the specifics about the cross-compile toolchain that you're using. So I've got a couple PRs open for that. And then there's just a question of if we want to maintain the separate build specs. So in the UMA world, we have Linux ARch64 and then an Linux ARch64 cross spec. And then so I have an issue open just asking if that's worthwhile to keep in the CMake world. I see minimal benefit there, but I opened the issue because there's possibly something I'm not thinking of. And then seems that one of the issues popped up in the ZOS build, so then I have a quick patch just to update the include path there that's being looked at. And that should then be ready to set on by default there.
Thanks, Devin. Might also be worth, it sounds like you're already talking to Kono-san about the value of the extra specs. It might be worth checking with Cheng and with others involved in the RISC-V work as well. See if they see value in separate specs.
Yeah, will do.
Marius, is there an update on the JIT server?
Yeah, so we had a few bug fixes, some of which were due to non-JIT server development that may introduce new front-end queries. Development-wise, there is this big piece of work related to AOT caching at JIT server. Last week I merged a PR that deals with deserialization of data at the client. Other stuff, I added the possibility of increasing the number of compilation threads at JIT server. Previously, it was fixed at 64, and now it can go very, very high. And the PR that enabled JIT server support for scaling down to 0 is merged now. Other news, we started last week to experiment with Amazon, OCP and Amazon, which is server, of course, and this is progressing well.